Hey, everyone. Happy Unfiltered Friday. I believe this is our second one for the year. It has to be our second, right? I think it's our second, if I can remember correctly. But happy Unfiltered Friday. I will give you all a couple of minutes to get into the live stream, and then we are going to get started. This topic that we are discussing today, adjusting this camera because it's a little off-centered. The topic that we are discussing today is the one that comes up the most frequently when we look at the companies that end up on the worst places to work list. So for most of the companies, if you look at their reviews on Glassdoor or any of the job review sites, there are certain themes that come up pretty frequently. And so part of what's going to happen in Unfiltered is we're going to address some of those things. But before I jump right into the content, I want to say happy Friday. For those of you who have been following me on Instagram, you should be following me. It's ICU Watching. This is the last day of 75 Hard. I have made it 75 days through one of the most rigorous programs that I have ever taken part of. And I started it on November 1st. And it was because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do hard things. And the program for me is one that is very hard. So the elements: no alcohol. You have to choose a diet and stick to it. You have to drink a gallon of water a day. You have to read 10 pages in a book, which was a joy because I love reading. You had to do 2 workouts a day, and one of those workouts had to be outside. And you all know that I live in Chicago. And so the thought of working out outside in December and January was almost enough to make me decide not to move forward with it. But then, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do hard things. And one of the things with the program is if you miss, and you have to take a picture of yourself every single day, progress picture. And if you miss one thing, one of the 10 things that you're supposed to do, or however many there were, you have to start back at day 1. And I had heard and read horror stories about people who would make it all the way to like day 71 and then forget to take their progress picture and then have to start all over. And so I was determined not to be one of those people. And today's the last day. And for my celebration tomorrow, I'm having popcorn for breakfast with this friend 75. And then I'm going to Mastro's to get a butter cake because I've not had sweets or any kind of deliciousness that's bad for me in 75 days. And so that's what I will be doing. All right, so let's get to it. Oh, also, I can't see in the chat sometimes if there are people who have questions or have things to say, but drop them anyway if you have a question, and I will jump back to it. I'll go into the chat afterwards and answer any questions that come up. For those of you who don't know me personally, my name is Wachin Yanu, and I am the founder and CEO of I Choose the Ladder, which is a career development agency that helps large corporations, so corporations with 1,500 or more employees, develop and retain their high-performing talent with a specialty on Black women talent. And we do that through professional development workshops, curated events, and digital resources like this one, Unfiltered, which is a weekly show where we tell you all the things that your employees aren't saying, and we give it to you straight, no chaser, unfiltered. The things that are causing you all to lose employees and to lose diverse talent and to lose Black women. And you know that we're in the Great Resignation, as it's being called right now. What I say is the Great Resignation is overdue. For a really long time, we have not figured out the employer-employee relationship, and people are fatigued. And there have been cries of the same challenges for years and years and years. And because employees aren't seeing a fast enough transformation in how they're being treated or how they're being thought about in the workplace, they're weighing their options right now. Is it worth it to stay? I know I have a salary, but is all of the other things that are that come with this salary, are they really worth it? And one of the things that comes up the most, and I think there are 4 or 5, in which we'll talk about at sometime in the future. But the thing that's come up the most has been feedback, or better yet, lack of feedback, and the inability of middle managers and people who are charged with helping to shape and navigate the corporate space, who aren't necessarily giving their employees or the individual contributors in the organization the types of feedback that they need in order to feel empowered, in order to feel seen, in order to feel valued, and in order to feel like they are a contributing member of a team. And if you don't have those things, eventually, right, people leave and they find spaces where they can get all of those things, or at least the majority of those things. And as we start to look at what's happening in the job market, and with companies really struggling to get talent and struggling to keep and retain female talent, the companies that are able to do the 5 things that we'll talk about later, but specifically starting with feedback, the ones that are able to do this well will be the ones who ultimately win and save their companies ton of money, because they won't have such high turnover rates. We all know, if you are in a leadership role, that the cost of attracting, recruiting, and training new talent is a lot, right? And if that can be saved, it has measurable impact on companies' bottom lines. But for whatever reason, there's a struggle, right, to get certain parts of this puzzle right. So today we're going to talk about feedback. I'm going to talk about it in a pretty general way. But one of the things that you have to think through when it comes to feedback is there's intergenerational things, there are interracial things, there are intersectional things that you all have to factor in when you decide the messaging that you are crafting to people. And what has been said overall is that the days of non-feedback feedback are over. And for the people on the live who have received non-feedback feedback, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of you who have not, and you may be someone who gives non-feedback feedback, this is something that you should start to think about. When someone does something wrong or says something or asks you for feedback or your opinion on something, you don't actually answer the question. You give kind of fluffy buzzwords and you say a lot of things, but you don't really say anything. And so the person who's listening to you, who's trusting your counsel, leaves feeling more confused than when they sat down, and they have nothing actionable that they can work towards or something that they can replicate, right? So they've been doing something great. You want them to keep doing that and multiply that effort, or they've been making some missteps and you want to call out the missteps so that they can course correct. But because we are uncomfortable as a society, I would say, but especially in corporate spaces, with having tough conversations, we think that it's better to avoid than it is to approach in a direct way. And by direct, I don't mean like a casual or laissez-faire way where you don't care how your messaging comes across or how your words impact people, because that's a whole different can of worms. I was going to say ball of worms. Clearly, that is not the phrase. It is not ball of worms. It's a can of worms. And your tone does matter. And I tell this to your employees all the time, right? You have to think about your messaging from the perspective of the person that you're talking to. How do they best understand and process information? And so that's how you have to give it to them. But let's go through the 5 things that can help you get better at giving feedback. The first thing is that you need to discuss the behaviors, not the person, right? And you also have to be able to tie that to the negative impact that it's having either on the business or on the person's professional opportunities, right? Professional trajectory. If you can't tie those 2 things together, you're probably just communicating a preference that you have. And just because someone does not perform in your preferred way does not make them ineffective, and it does not make how they are operating wrong. So when you're giving feedback on a behavior, you have to first be able to articulate to yourself how this behavior is negatively impacting the business or that person's career goals, because you know what they're trying to work towards. And then you think through how this can be communicated to said employee in a way that they can hear and process the information. For some managers, it may be a fear that they wouldn't receive the message from you well, or they may receive it better from someone else. I'm going to challenge you on that, because you're the person who's been hired to be their manager and to manage them professionally, right? And so if that means you need to work on relationship building with your team, trust building with your team and all that, that is a responsibility that you have to own, because again, you're being paid to manage the careers of said people within your department. So again, discuss the behavior, not the person. Make sure that the behavior is having a negative impact on either the business or their professional opportunities. And then you find a way in which they can hear the information because you want them to do something once you've had the conversation. The second thing is you need to be specific in your feedback, right? You can't speak in generalities because people then leave not necessarily understanding which situation is applicable to what, and they do nothing, right? They think that you're just picking on them. So be specific in the action that happened that negatively impacted the person's career possibilities or opportunities, and also that negatively impacted the department. If you have scenarios, specific scenarios that have come up that you've noticed over time, you want to be specific about when the person does this, this is the impact. Because sometimes, especially for more junior employees, they don't necessarily understand the impact or the unintended consequences for some of the actions that they take. So you want to make sure that you're being very specific about the thing or the behavior that is causing the issue. The third thing that you want to do is you want to be timely. So remember when you were a kid, or maybe it was just me, one of the things that my parents would do is if I was getting in trouble, there was delayed punishment. So let's say my brother and I did something bad. We were bad kids. We did a lot of things that we should not have been doing as children. But I know that for some of those things, like it would be a week until we got punished, right? It would be like time would pass. And by the time it got to it, like I understood, I remembered some of what I did, but I didn't so there was not timely punishment for the misadventures of watching and Bill, right? You can't do that. So when people have something that they've done wrong, you need to bring them in or talk to them pretty immediately to stop the behavior. And you need to, yes, think through how to communicate and all that, but you can't wait until your year in review to talk about something that someone did wrong in January. Because for the next 11 months, they've been doing the same behavior because they had no idea that it was having a negative impact on their career or on their department. They thought they were just doing their jobs. And you knew for 11 months that they were doing something wrong, or even 6 months, or even 2 months, or even a month. And you did not, as your manager, say something about it. So they didn't have a fair opportunity to correct their behavior. So you want to make sure that it's timely. Don't wait too long. If you have practice with someone, giving feedback with someone, I think you should 100% do that. If you need help with language, you have peers across your organizations who I'm sure would be very happy to have you practice with them, but you want to make sure that it's done in a timely fashion. The fourth thing that you need to be thinking about is data, right? So in the same way that we tell employees when they want raises or they want promotions or they want more access in their jobs, that their feelings are not enough because feelings are not facts, you also want to have some data and some concrete examples of when the behaviors happened, the consequences of that behavior, right? And using very specific data over time, if it's repeated or habitual behavior. And you want to make sure that it's not just your opinions, because again, how you feel is important, but it's not a fact, right? It can be disputed. It can be argued against. It can be interpreted in a variety of ways. So you want to make sure that you have data and not just your opinions on the behaviors that are negatively impacting the department or the person's career. And then the last thing, and I think this is a missed opportunity that a lot of leaders have, is that you want to be solutions oriented and a thought partner, and seen as a thought partner in correcting behavior that is not productive within your organizations, right? So part of feedback is having a part where you are discussing solutions or best next steps together in partnership, so that people don't walk into feedback conversations feeling like, oh, I'm about to get beat up about this, or I'm about to get judged, or I'm about to be, reprimanded. They also understand that there's going to be a part of the conversation where you are thought partners in what the best course of action is moving forward. If you dictate to them what that best course of action is, and they don't necessarily understand why they're doing it because there's not been thought partnership in that work, they won't sustain it. They'll do it, and then they'll have other situations where they'll replicate their old behaviors because they have not been able to think through how to apply that one concept across a variety of situations within your organization. And so thought partnership is how you do that, right? And I know this stuff seems time consuming, but when you're losing employees and you're losing a ton of money, do you want to lose a little bit of time, or do you want to lose a lot of money? And I wouldn't even think it's losing time, because you're investing in the people who are the future leaders of your organization. but you need the time, right, to be able to so that they can see that you are invested in them, that you think highly enough of them to spend time on your calendar going through solutions with a challenge that they have, right? Like that is a positive. That's an environment where people feel valued and feel cared about and feel like they're being invested in the same way that they're investing in those organizations. And so think through, right, if there's a behavior that you have noticed in some employees, all employees. If it's all employees, then you need to rethink, kind of cultural things. But if it's specific employees that you're having one-on-one conversations with, or that you are mentoring through your organization, you want to think through, what does thought partnership look like? How do you get them to understand and buy in? And how do you create opportunities where you are also open to their ideas on how they can correct any missteps that they've had in the past? But those are just some quick and dirty 5 little tips to try as you start to go into feedback. I know for folks for review season, some people are at mid-year review, some people were at year end or finishing up those. It's going to be important that you give feedback that makes people feel empowered and that makes people feel optimistic about their future with your company and in your department. That's going to be on you. That's part of the job during the reviews, and knowing the current climate as it pertains to, the employment market, and that there are companies who would love to poach your high performing talent. They will spend what it takes to get them. And so you want to make sure that you are creating an environment where people want to be, not an environment where people are just because they don't feel like they have any options right now. And with that, if y'all have any questions, feel free to drop me a message, drop me a DM on here. You all know that I respond. I don't always respond instantly, but I do always respond. And then if you are not following me on all the socials, follow me at I See You Watching on Instagram. And I will see y'all next week. Have a fantastic weekend, y'all. Bye.